everybody, and welcome to the post-game analysis of Game 2 World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. I'm International Master Sopiko Guramishvili, showing you the highlights of round 2. Magnus was playing with white pieces, and game started with d4, knight f6, knight f3, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop e7, bishop f4. So we have queen's gambit declined, castle e3, c5, d takes c5, take on c5, queen c2, knight c6, a3, queen a5, rook d1, and here came the first highlight of the game as Fabiano surprised Magnus with, as he said, a little bit forgotten move, rook d8. This was complete new move to us commentators. We were commentating on this game with Alexander Grishuk, and he said that he hasn't seen this move, and rook e8 and bishop e7, are the main moves. But after the game at press conference, they asked about rook d8 to Fabiano, and he said that rook d8 was played by strong players long time ago, and nobody else tried it afterwards, so he decided to try it. Rook d1 and rook d8. Here Magnus thought for a big while and decided to go for bishop e2. Of course, knight d2, as he mentioned, is a critical move. After the game, he was also asked about it at press conference, and he said that he was trying not to get into preparation as Fabiano was playing very fast, and he did not want to get into computer lines or Fabiano's team lines. So he was trying to somehow play the moves he liked and not to play something which was forced. After knight d2, I don't know what Fabiano was going to reply, but that definitely he had it analyzed and he had it prepared. So I won't go into details of this line, and let's see what kind of continuation we'll have this rook d2 line. So after bishop e2, knight e4, castle, knight c3, b takes c3, this is already very important position because the structure changed. Our pawns are on c3, c4 doubled, and a3 pawn is weak, but of course white has his own trumps as well. Sometimes knight g5, keeping an eye on h7, and this bishop on c8 is pretty bad. Black has big problems to develop and develop this bishop and finish development. h6 was played, a4 and knight e7. At press conference, Magnus said that he missed all this idea with knight e7, and the following move, which is not a bad move, he considered that knight e5 was just a miscalculation because of bishop d6 that he missed, and Fabiano replied it pretty fast after thought of 8 minutes. We were considering bishop d7 just to develop as fast as possible, but bishop d6 is the first line of the computer, and the idea behind it is that black wants to go queen c7 and bother this knight on e5. cd5, knight d5, and here came the critical moment and the second highlight of this game. Is knight f7 working or not? That was definitely the question Magnus was thinking about for a while, and there were a lot of things going on chat, a lot of tweets, what happens on knight f7, what is going on, and yeah, Magnus was thinking about it, but he said that he could not just make it work, and he was an hour behind on clock, so he didn't want to try out his luck. Knight f7 is definitely very interesting. Sorry, bishop f3 was played in the game, but knight f7 is a very interesting sacrifice, which leads to a very, very complicated positions. King f7 and bishop h5. The point of knight f7 is that we don't sacrifice this knight just like this. We want to get it back, because after bishop h5, king g8, take on d6, we have c4, and there is the pin, so we're hoping to get this knight back and hope to win extra pawn. The difference between giving check or not is that we could take on d6 and rook d6 and play c4. Bishop h5 would transpose into the lines we will cover. Knight b4, queen h7. Messy position. What is going on? Rook d1, and knight c6. Black has just the piece, but because the king is very weak and we still have white-colored bishop, this position is very complicated, and piece is not a winning extra piece for black. e4, queen c5, h3, b6, and this is the position which is very complicated, very messy, with some positional compensation for white, but I think it's easier to give check first. King g8. The problem with king f8 is that after king f8 we can just take on d6, and play queen g6, and now queen f7 is big threat. So king g8 has to be played. Bishop d6, rook d6, c4. Again, we're hoping for the spin, as knight b4 is not working anymore. Well, not working. I mean that just we have move queen g6, and in case of rook d1, we have mate in 2, queen e8 and bishop g6. But black can defend mate with rook d8, queen f7, king h8. Big blunder would be to go king h7, bishop g6, king h8, and bishop b1. The queen comes to g6 and queen h7 mate. So king h8, and after king h8, lots of things can be played. Bishop g6 with f4, f5 ideas, and rook g8. It is very difficult for black to play this position, this exact position. So it's better not to go knight b4, and instead of knight b4, answer the pin with pin, either with queen c7 or rook c6. I like rook c6 more. Queen c7 leads to the lines with queen g6, knight f6, take, and queen f7, king h8 once again. If king h7, then this would be, this first, rook d1. No bishop g6, because we would not control d1 square. When the queen goes, then bishop g6, king h8, queen f8, knight g8, only move, and bishop f7. This is just lost. So after king h7, bishop I already showed you rook d1. After king h8, rook d1, queen b6, queen f8, king h7, and here this exact position we had on live, and Sasha said g4, which is the first line of computer as well. The idea is that we need to get our rook to the 8th rank to threaten mate with queen h8. But the problem is that we have back rank problem, and also queen b1, and this would lead to a very bad, if bishop d1, just nothing is there, just bishop d7, and if we trade rooks, black is just extra, black has just extra piece. So after king h7 and g4, the bishop is not hanging anymore on h5. We have square for our king, and we are threatening rook d8. But this is not killing, because of course knight h5 would be a big mistake, or not a very big mistake, because he still has e5 to hold. And in this position we would get same line with perpetual check. Or he can start with e5, and after rook d8 give check, then take on h5, g takes h5, and queen e4. And the thing here is that if white wants to be greedy and play with f3, then bishop h3 is strong, and after king takes h3, rook d8, queen d8, and queen f3 is winning for black. So white has to be careful. So we were analyzing queen c7, and another thing black can do is rook c6. Again, pin, and after queen g6, knight f6. This same line, but we keep the rooks. Queen f7, knight has to go on f6, otherwise knight e7 would immediately lose to queen e8, king h7, and rook d8. And mate is coming. And after queen g6, knight f6, queen f7, and king h8, again same thing happens on king h7, check and check. So after king h8, queen f8, king h7, bishop e2. This is the only move that keeps the balance in this position, despite the fact that white is piece down. Any other move, like let's say bishop f3, wouldn't be good, not due to rook c4, which is also fine, but queen c5, and suddenly black is threatening to trade the queens. This is just lost for white. So bishop e2, what is the idea behind it is that if now queen c5, then after bishop d3 we have a great check. g6, this knight is hanging on f6. So bishop e2, only move is e5, with the idea that on bishop d3 we will cover with e4, we'll cover this check with e4. But instead of bishop d3, of course, white can try to play rook d8, queen c5, bishop d3, and e4, but this is very different position because our rook is already on d8, and after queen h8, king g6, we are sacrificing another piece on e4 because we have lots of them. Knight e4, queen e8, king h7. If king f6, which is a try for black, it turns out that this position with queen e4, queen e7, and queen d3 is very difficult to play with black pieces because of the weak king. Nothing dramatic, nothing direct for white, but there is no development yet for this bishop on c8, and the king on f6 is horrible. So black can go just king h7, queen g8, king g6, queen e8, and repeat the moves, and the game will end in perpetual check. As it often happens that these kind of complicated lines with so much tactics going on, in the end you just see zeros on your engine, ends in perpetual check. So we can definitely understand Magnus. He didn't want to go into this line. He probably briefly calculated knight f7, but he didn't want to get in to the preparation. Also, the fact that Fabiano was playing very fast influenced and he didn't want to get into preparation, thinking that okay, bishop d6 was played very fast, and cd knight d5, knight f7 is definitely analyzed. So instead of knight f7, he went for bishop f3, and after several exchanges on the board, we get this endgame. Queen c7, this was the moment where on live we thought that bishop d7 is an alternative to queen c7 to give up this pawn on b7, but after rook b8, for example, bishop h6, then queen a5, bishop b5, this looks very pleasant for black, and instead, after bishop d7, white can of course try to go rook d1, queen c7, and queen e4 with double-edged position. White has weak pawns, weak e5, c3, and a4 pawn, but his pieces, d1 rook, e4 queen, and the bishop, they are definitely active, and it somehow compensates because black cannot consolidate and just put pressure on these weaknesses. F takes e5, queen c7, and rook b1 was played. The idea is clear that white wants to keep an eye on b7 pawn and not let the c8 bishop to develop easily. So rook b1, rook b8 was played, and queen d3, which is a very important move. If not queen d3, and if white lets black to develop easily with bishop d7, bishop c6, then white is definitely worse with so many weak pawns. But the idea behind queen d3 is that after bishop d7 we have this amazing d6 square, and Magnus could go here direct queen d6, but he played a5. It's even better probably. If queen a5, then bishop is hanging on d7. So this was not a pawn blunder, and we didn't see any other move, just bishop c6 or b6, which could transpose into similar lines. a5, bishop c6, queen d6, an important move, not to allow simple exchanges, and then black puts pressure on weak pawns. Queen d6, e takes d6, and bishop f3. This is another critical moment, I think, for players who don't like to ruin the structure, the pawn structure. So what happens is that in rook endgame, when we have 4 against 3, it is much easier to defend with f3, f2, and h2 rather than having f2, g2, and h2. And the thing is that we already have square for our king, and the idea is if we get rid of all these pawns, which happened in the game, then white wants to trade one pawn, f to e, and 3 against 2 is an easy draw. So remember, don't be scared of this bad pawn structure. If you look at it, it's horrible, all pawns are weak, but this one, in this particular case, it is much easier to defend with double pawns, 3 against 4, rather than normal f2, g2, h2. King f8. Bishop f3, gf, king f8, and c4. So this goes very forced. King e8, a6, b6, c5. You cannot take it. King d7 should be played, and we take it. Obviously, rook b6 couldn't be played because Then a pawn runs with a7. And after ab, a7, we got this endgame. And even if we give up, now material is equal, but even if we give up d6 pawn, it will mean that we would have to defend 4 against 3. It's not scary to give up the d6 pawn. Eventually, black will manage to win it. King g2, e5. The idea is clear that king comes to e6, rook d7, and he wants to grab the pawn. Rook b4 and f5. Black, of course, could get the pawn directly, but then we could play f4, trade this pawn, and 3 against 2, easy draw. So f5 happened, and after rook b6, king e6, d7, giving up the pawn without any problem, and then rook b5, king e6, giving a check, and keeping the king to the e5. Only way to get rid of this is to go to g5. And after rook b5, king f4, rook b4, Fabiano decided not to go king g5 and rook b5, rook e7 and play for other 50 moves. But he decided instead to go e4, take, h3, and after rook a5, the thing here is very easy. White is holding on this pawn on e4, and after check, for example, he goes king f1, and the rook has to be on g-file to not to allow king g2 back. But rook b7, rook g6, and rook b4, the king cannot come king g5, king h4, because e4 pawn is hanging. So here the moves were repeated and the game was drawn. Pretty exciting game. I hope that you enjoyed the post-game analysis, and thanks for watching. Bye bye.